Welcome. I'm Marta Moreno Vega, President of Creative Justice Initiative, and welcome to the conversation, Stop the Mythology, Framing a Narrative of Truth-Telling. We put this panel together with friends that have been talking about what's going on in the country. And the reason being that we feel, and I certainly feel that way, I wanted the panel to happen, that the narrative that we're hearing on the news and various stations are soft pedaling what's going on, are clouding what's going on, using words of surprise that this is happening and how could this happen in the United States? How is it possible that the Capitol could be rushed by white militia, white supremacists the way that it was? And the reality is that people knew it. We know that people knew it. The president called for it to happen. It has been on networks and on social media for quite a while. So why the surprise? Why the lack of preparedness? You know, we're hearing the comparison, right? Saying if it was Black Lives Matter, it would have been full with police. The question is, why wasn't it full with police when we knew that there was white military militia, white supremacists coming to Washington? Why was it soft pedal? It's more than racism. It's a move to destroy democracy that we've all been fighting to protect. Because as people of color, we know that we have had to fight to protect democracy, in spite of our bodies being victim and targeted. So that a discussion amongst us, I felt, was very important. So I thank the panelists for being on such short notice. So I'd like to first start by welcoming you, saying thank you for being with us. Be part of the conversation by joining in the chat. This is not the last, this is the first of this conversation, because we know that this is not a situation that's going to stop. It's not going to stop on January 20th, because they know that these white militias have been arming themselves from before the Ku Klux Klan, right? So now it's at a level that we need to address it publicly and speak about it publicly. But more importantly, we need to speak about it as people of color, because this is a race war, and we need to call it what it is. It's a race war. So I'd like to introduce you to people I love, people I respect, people who have informed me about these issues, so that we can share with you the information that we understand. So I'd like each panelist to introduce themselves. Let's start with Isis. Hello, Isis, are you there? Isis. Rosa? Am I doing something wrong?
Hi.
Hi, Rosa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rosa Clemente. I am a organizer, producer, scholar, activist, and trying to be a better revolutionary.
I was trying to unmute myself.
Esmeralda? We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. All right. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, brothers and sisters. Esmeralda Simmons. I'm in Brooklyn. I'm a an attorney that works on racial justice issues. And I just want everyone to know that we better hear the message loud and clear.
Lumumba?
Peace. Good evening. Lumumba Bandele, organized and educator at the Malcolm X grassroots movement based here in Central Brooklyn.
Sandra?
Hola, buenas noches. I'm Sandra Rodriguez Cotto. I'm a reporter here in Puerto Rico. I'm a mother, a writer, and I always like to tell things that people don't want to talk about. So a lot of people don't like that, but I have to do it because we need to keep on the conversations that are usually the media doesn't like to discuss.
I think Isis is having problems. So she'll probably come back on. I'd like to introduce you to my co-moderator for the evening, Olga Chapman Rivera. You're muted.
Hello, everyone. I am Olga Chapman Rivera. I am based also as Sandra in Puerto Rico, and I'll be co-moderating with Marta. The first thing that we want to do is we want to show you a video and that we thought it was interesting to show so we can frame the conversation. It's a conversation from 2019. I was going to say last year, but it's not last year, it's 2019. But I think it's a conversation that is relevant to what we're talking about. So let's watch this short video and then we'll come back.
I mean, America's not unique in its sins. As a country, we're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. Where we may be singular is a refusal to acknowledge them. And the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, goodness, to hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain the kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that when the Tea Party was happening, we were saying, it's just about economic populism. It's not about race. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials. That the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore. And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. So the thing is this, and I'll say this, and I'll take the hit on it. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America confronting, white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence. And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to oh my God, is this who we are? And here's another generation of babies. Think about it. That 2-year-old had his bones broken by two parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. Either we're going to change Nicole, or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being white. Finally.
when I listened to the video originally, and I listened to it yesterday and asked Olga to play it, is that is the feeling that many of us have had, that our parents had, that our grandparents had. How do you protect our children? How do you protect us? How do we protect us? As a mother of 2 sons, how do I protect my sons? As a grandmother of 2 daughters, how do I protect my granddaughters? So that is on the back of all of our minds, as we were activists and on the streets trying to change and injustice, racial inequity, and protect community. So I'd like to pose the question to us all. This innocence of whiteness is unreal. We know that because it is so intentional, and we saw it last week. What do we do to change the narrative for our people so that they understand that there's a different type of narrative that we have to use to influence an action, that everyone is involved in racial justice work and racial equity work, because it's not for someone else. It's for our own well-being. It's for our own children's well-being. What's the next step?
Esmeralda here. I am very, very happy to be in this discussion, because I believe we have to tell the truth to our people, that we are not the ones who have declared a race war. Oh, Isis is back, right? The war has been declared on us. Those people who are at the Capitol building have said that this is the beginning. They're not going to stop until this country gets back to what it needs to be. And they're talking about us not having any power, not having any say, and preferably not even being here. I want our people to understand that they have said this loudly and clearly. If you don't know what the symbolism if you can't read the symbolism of the Confederate flag being raced through the Capitol building, or a noose on the Capitol, then I urge you to go back and look at the antics of the Ku Klux Klan. They are coming for us. They do not want us to be empowered. So we have to stand firm. And we have to let them know we are not going anywhere. And in fact, we claim this. Black people claim this. Native Americans claim this. Latinos claim this. This country is not theirs. And we too will stand up and take our stance if, in fact, they want to come at us. I don't expect the government to protect us. All you have to do is go back 120 years and see what happened after the Civil War to know where the government's going to be if this really goes down. They abandoned us before, they will abandon us again. It's on us, folks. And I'm not preaching violence, but I am saying we at least need to know what is really going on here. These people are in every state, and they want to manifest that this weekend coming to show their strength.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lumumba here, and I want to echo, what Mama Esmeralda's just said, but I want to just reframe it a little bit and say that what we're looking at is an escalation of a war that's been waged on us that I don't think has ever really ended since we were brought to these shores. What we're looking at is now the uncovering and the publicizing of different acts that have been happening. We know as organizers the kind of calls for support that we've been getting around the country from people in some of these remote locations in Middle America who have been terrorized, some of whom have been killed, some of whom have been attacked by white supremacists, by law enforcement agents. And we're talking about physical attacks. What we saw in the Capitol has been happening in different corners of this country. And so we're seeing it now come home. We're seeing it now be visited to the Capitol, the nation's capital. And so it has never stopped, but it's escalating. And it's escalating to the point now where people can no longer ignore it. People can no longer claim that it doesn't exist. And so the conversations that you're seeing now are a result of there being an undeniable fact that it exists and that we now actually have to have a conversation about it.
Well, to your point, and I was having the conversation earlier with Olga, right? A lot of what you're hearing on TV is you have to prove that it's intentional. There has to be proof that it's intentional, right? The fact that the president was talking on it and calling people to march on the Capitol somehow doesn't seem enough, right? For people who are speaking on the news and speaking to our communities. That the aspect of intent, and that's why it's important for Isis and Esmeralda to be on as lawyers. I mean, wasn't that intent? Telling people to go to the Capitol? Wasn't it intent planning this openly on social media? How does it not be intentional?
Well, I think that this is Isis talking. I think that this conversation about intent is really just a ruse. It's really just one of the red herrings to try to yet again obfuscate responsibility and minimize what has happened. And I think that, first of all, the words themselves are indicative of intent. Second of all, if you show up at a Capitol and you have broken in, you have broken windows, you have on you Kevlar vests, ballistic equipment, you have incendiary devices, you have God knows what, because you weren't scanned in, you may have knives, you may have whatever it is you have. The intent is inferred just by the actions themselves. I mean, the actions, in other words, the actions themselves speak to the intent of this insurrection. So I think that, this constant, I think, talk about clouding legal issues, using legalese in order to cloud what exactly has happened, and what all of us with our own eyes have seen, is one of the tactics that they use to try to excuse and minimize what is happening at the Capitol right now, or what happened this week and what continues to happen with the minimization.
Yeah, I mean, this is Rosa. I think what we have to just be critically aware right now is that this is a psychological war they're waging right now, so that people are literally under terror in their communities, coupled with the global pandemic. And then also coupled with the fact that, this is a contradictory moment for us in this sense. We want to abolish prisons, right? And I did it too. I'm like, oh, they need to get arrested right away, And I was like, well, how would that work if you want an abolitionist framework, But then I was like, there are people who are actually doing that work of accountability, restorative justice. Not that this pertains to that. I think that people think that if they start seeing arrests, that this is the end of it. Like, Trump is the least of the problems right now. The problem is there are literally people in the Congress, and we know that this was an inside job. I just saw a report right before I came here where the Republican caucus is still going to try to contest the election, and that they're telling their people they're happy that you are going out to the Capitol. So I think what we have to talk about now is that any legal stuff, it doesn't apply to us. I don't know how much more we can try to reform things where our rights had to be legislated and fought for all the time. And then lastly, and I'm going here and there because everything's so fast and I'm really trying to be super thoughtful and process. I'm like, we need to declare whiteness a public health emergency, period. Whiteness is the public health emergency, from the pandemic to what we're seeing right now, to the terror that they're inflicting, but also to right now, the young African-American, Latino, trans, queer person being stopped and probably brutalized by the police somewhere in this country or all over this country right now, as our communities that have the least material resources are the ones that, particularly if we keep talking about applying the law to them, then it will make it very easy for them to pass these domestic terrorist laws. Where the FBI today said, I wouldn't call this domestic terrorism, right? Because it was an inside job. Y'all knew what was happening. But, you know, we're in a fine line right now. Like, okay, maybe Trump should be off Twitter. What happens when they start, and they've already done this, they just kicked off 2 LA organizations, one that stops eviction and one that stops homelessness, because their new rules are now saying that those, the truth of what's happening around homeless people could be an incendiary tweet. So right now we're also battling with major censorship. Everybody's jumping on that. And then trying to ride on them being criminally prosecuted and then passing these laws. All of this is going to end up affecting our communities that most. So I think at this moment, we do have to not only tell the truth, we have to have a very real conversation about, like, what can we imagine this world to look like without, you know, all of this at this moment? Is this the moment that we try to reimagine everything? I would say yes. I just think that people are really moving real quick, and not because of just him, but we all saw this happen after September 11th. We know what exactly happened when it came to domestic terrorism. I mean, to terrorism laws, and how it still impacts particularly Muslim people all throughout this country. So those are the things I'm thinking about.
I'd like to add something here, if I may. I don't know where we go from here, Olga and the rest of the group, but I can say that couldn't help but wonder if those type of reactions took place precisely the same day that the people of Georgia elected their first African-American senator. So it was a historic event that day that sparked also the flames, and it was sort of muted within all the controversy of what happened later. And since then, we have been watching the news every single day, watching all the coverage. I just got a new information published at The Hill that an Olympic gold, a 2-time gold medalist he's a swimmer. He was identified as one of the rioters. So as somebody mentioned, I think it was easy before, it's going all over the place. It's going to continue. And my concern right now as a reporter also is the fact that the press is being targeted as part of the problem. They're targeting the reporters. They're targeting the press. They called, basically following up on what the president had said before, he called reporters the enemy of the people. And some of the messages that you can hear during the riots were murder the media, we are the news now. Those were some of the phrases that they were saying, and many reporters were assaulted. And just to give you a precise data here, because of what happened during the summer, and May, in the aftermath of the George Floyd protest, it ignited a lot of harassment against the journalists, particularly African American and Latino journalists. And just the U.S. Freedom Tracker recorded over 430 incidents between May and June of 2020, and those have increased a lot. Particularly, there's an organization called Fundamedios, who accounted for about 346, about 329 incidents of violence against journalists. And now they're comparing the United States to some of the other countries in Latin America and other places where journalism is being on constant harassment. We have I can tell about a couple of Latina journalists, one of them who basically lost her sight after the George Floyd events. So they're not only attacking the population, they're also attacking the means of getting the information, which is the media, which are the reporters. And that for me is another area of concern, because I do understand there's racism and there's bias in media coverage. And I do understand that we need to work as a community to promote media literacy, particularly among Afro-Latinos that need to be more represented, especially on Spanish language media that are historically have been racist, and they have been neglecting spaces for Afro-Latinos, that's completely the truth. And I know that for many, many years, but we do need to educate the entire communities into being able to deflect what is fake news, to understand the differences between the right and the correct media, what is journalism, what is fair reporting, and what is fake news. And that has to be also part of the conversation, if I may add.
Yeah, can I just say, as a journalist myself, I that fake news thing, that's for his 75 million people. Like, what I'm trying to do right now has nothing to do with them, because I know I'm not going to change half the people that voted, half the country that voted for him. I think they're the ones that are dealing with the fake news issue. The issue in our communities is that we don't want to look at other sources. We say we want other sources of mainstream media, and when they exist, we don't support them, right? So it's like, there should be 3 replicas of a democracy now. There should be all the media collectors in Puerto Rico. There should be double the journalists of us as Afro-Latinos, African descendant people. You know, I think that right now is that journalists have always been under attack in this country. Ida B. Wells Barnett had to carry guns, strapped to her while she was reporting every lynching. So truth tellers are always attacked. And I see, like, you and other people, we're the truth tellers, right? So I think we do ourselves a disservice if we try to, quote, tackle fake news, because they're the ones that came up with that term, not us. So for me, what this us coming together is about is, okay, what is our narrative? What journalists are we going to support? Why are we depending on this Black and Latino punditry class that is paid millions of dollars to be on mainstream channels talking for our people, and never really get into a place where the political thought is different or diverse? That's never going to happen on mainstream. So that's what I'm saying. We need people out there, for us that are journalists, to support that work. But we also have younger organizations. I think this is important to recognize. I think post Troy Davis to where we are now, or if we look at what happened in Puerto Rico, and who came from outside of the island to cover, as well as everybody in Puerto Rico who was already telling their stories. We have citizen journalists, right? And the problem with that is that there's a lot of fear right now with journalists, not just because of Trump, but look, Obama and them are the ones that threw Julian Assange under the bus, whether people like him or not. The Obama administration was the one that started putting, journalists or not protecting the whistleblowers, or not protecting journalists. So for people who know what Julian Assange is going through, there could be differences with us, but he's going to die in prison. He's being at this point, he's been so psychologically tortured, but he's the one that told us, right, that in Honduras, it was Zelaya that was overthrown by Hillary Clinton, and the millions of things WikiLeaks have done, and how they're being attacked. So I think there's also a fear, like you said, Sandra, there is a fear, particularly of us as journalists, of African American, African descendant people, but we need more of us. And younger people are real savvy with social media, but we still need people out there who can then analyze what the grassroots is saying, what's coming from social media, and then how you said, Sandra, to make sure that it's truthful.
I agree with what you just said, Rosa, completely, and I also understand that with what happened with Assange and also during the Barack Obama's administration, the surveillance of journalists as well as media outlets. But what I'm saying is the fact that the mainstream media, we all know that mainstream they usually tend to be racist or bigoted. They don't cover all the instances. But just to give you an example, I'm here based in Puerto Rico. The governor, the resident commissioner who has a presence there at the Congress, but she has no right to vote. They basically said that they were appalled and they were against of what happened during the riots. And basically they changed the narrative, and the entire media here on the island have done the same. Why? Because they don't want to deal and they don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, which is race, relations, racism, and discrimination. And I think that's what we need to bring and communicate within our communities. And I'm just giving our example here in Puerto Rico. We as independent journalists or the small radio stations, we have been covering the issue and also on social media. But we need more people out there, attorneys, scholars, investigators, and community leaders to come forward and push for the agenda. We need more voices also to promote particularly in the regular media. We need that space, and we have to do it. And as I said, as you mentioned, on mainstream media, those pundits are paid millions, and some of them, and you might say that we have to sponsor or support the small media organizations. I do agree with that. Of course, I understand, but also we have to help those other ones accountable. So we need to, ask for more representation, I would say.
I would say that it's not just, am I, oh,
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
No, I can't hear Marta.
Okay.
Am I on? Okay. We need to get more information to our communities in terms of what's going on, right? Because the perspective being projected almost excludes us, right? If you look at what's happening on TV right now and the images, they're horrible. They're horrible, but why are they happening, right? Why was there no police there? Just listening to the news, right? They said this is the most heavily guarded area on the planet. So if it was the area that was most heavily guarded, there was no protection. So why was there no protection? So there are questions that just are lying out there that are confusing to all of us. But most important, the absence of us being centered in the conversation of racism, race inequity, right? Sandra's point of Georgia becomes critical. It's off the media already. What happened in Georgia is amazing, absolutely amazing. That process of organizing, how do we organize like that across the country, right? Because if they're afraid of the demographics are here. We're not going nowhere. Esmeralda said, we ain't going nowhere. So the demographics have already shifted. They're not going to stop shifting. Right. So then the question becomes, so that we don't turn into South Africa, right, during apartheid, then what is the narrative and action going forward? Because if you don't have the narrative framing what we need to be thinking about it and how we need to be planning at multiple levels. We're not talking about one level. I mean, it was clear last week that complicit action was throughout the system. So we're not talking about everybody acting the same. We're saying, what are the kinds of diverse ways of being present? If you're a mama in your home, if you're out in the workplace, if you're in the military, whatever, what are the actions? What are the thinking that drives that action?
I believe, Esmeralda here from Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, I believe that it's incumbent upon all of us, and I really salute um, the journalists, to tell the story to our people in clear and plain language, and not to nice it up. Don't cover up. We have to say exactly what is happening now. Thank you so much, Lumumba, for clarifying the fact that this is ongoing. It's not new, but folks, we need to take off the rose-colored glasses. This is not the land of the brave and the free. I mean, I know a lot of brave. I don't know too many free. Okay, and we need to be telling not only ourselves. I don't care what church or what kind of religion you use to worship, or if you don't worship at all, whoever you gather with, this needs to be the conversation. And Marta, you're right. We need to be talking about how do we react to this? There has been so little talk about the assault on our people, the continual psychological, economic discrimination. You can call it whatever you want. It's called America in my mind. The assault on our people from the beginning, that we almost don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. It's too painful. Well, guess what? It's in our face now. Just like it was in our face in the 1890s and the 1900s. I mean, they might as well have just burnt a cross on the lawn, because they did everything but that to let you know that they're there. They're not ashamed of it. They're proud of it. They believe in white supremacy. They believe it's their birthright to keep this country under their control and to keep us under their control. And if we don't start talking to each other about it through the media, through social media, but I'm talking about one-on-one, at the dinner table,
Exactly.
in the classroom, at the university, at the supermarket, the barbershop, the salon. And this, if I got to get my hair braided for 3 hours, this is what I'm going to be talking about. Not
exactly. It has to be throughout the system. It can't be the responsibility of only one group. Like, let's say the media reporter, right? The reporters like Sandra, like Rosa, provide us the information. But that information has to be filtered through at all levels. They're not the targets.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We have to have that in church. We have to have that in schools. We have to have that at the dinner table, because it has to be a conversation that permeates all of our communities, right? And cross communities. And that's the other. I mean, I think that when we were organizing in the 70s and 80s, that cross between and that combination and that coordination between African Americans, Latinos, African Americans, and marginalized Europeans was happening in very real ways. And of course, that's why a lot of the destruction happened, right? But that's a conversation that has to happen given the demographic numbers now, right? How then do we cross our communities, right? An intercultural, interracial conversation, right? Because it's affecting us all. And Isis, I think I cut you off before. I apologize.
No worries. I'm having lots of technical difficulties, so I apologize if I'm cutting in on people. But one of the things that I think is important for us to think about moving forward is that there has been an organized effort, and I'm not just talking about the paramilitarized far right, which has been, unchecked and unnamed. I mean, they're not even named as domestic terrorists. I watched the DOJ do a press conference today in which they were asked about that term, and they rebuffed it and said, we don't like to use those terms because we have other statutes on the books that we can use to address what happened. And then he went on to name a litany of offenses and everything from trespassing to sedition. But consciously moving away from the idea of domestic terrorism. And so there's a reticence to really name what is happening right now. Congressman Connor Lamb also spoke today and talked about the FBI and the Congress receiving credible threats of ongoing plans for violence at the Capitol and at the state capitals. And he said that there was one of the warnings was that 400 quote end of quote patriots were going to show up at the Capitol. And the use of the word patriot is antithetical to what a seditionist is, what a traitor is, right? So there's and the DOJ described the insurrectionists as rioters, right? On the same vein as, you know, overzealous sports fans in XYZ college town going buck wild after the game. That's what a rioter is. What happened at the state capitol is not a part of a riot. You know, it was part of an attempted coup and an insurrection. And what we fail to address is what we fail to name, right? And to Marta's point, how do we get to the point where we have the images that we saw last week, unless there are people at all levels of law enforcement, in the Congress, in the DOJ, who, if not complicit, are apologetic and sympathetic to their point of view, right? And so I think that, to everyone's point here, what is happening, you know, and what we saw this summer of the Black Lives Matter movement was one of the most broad-based, sustained, inclusive social justice movements that this country has ever seen. And then we see an election in which the people win the presidency and they win the Senate, and it's terrifying to this group of people. It's but the truth of the matter is that they're vastly the minority of people, right? And this country is moving forward, and people are engaged in the streets, people are engaged at the ballot box, people are engaged civically. And I think that this moment has really awoken a lot of us to do the work of organizing that got us to where we are today. I mean, by no means can we let our guard down, and by no means does that mean that we don't address in reality what happened at the Capitol and what are the root causes of what happened at the Capitol. But the narrative is that I think that we continue to be engaged politically, we continue to be engaged on a local level, and we continue to do the things that we have done to get us to where we are. The problem is that there's always a counter to that, right? These people who are in the minority are intent on keeping minority rule, and they have done that through the courts, and they continue to pack the courts, both at the Supreme Court level and the federal judiciary, in an attempt to have a backstop to the minority rule. They continue to push forward agendas of voter suppression, of disenfranchisement. Even when the Florida voters voted to re-enfranchise the felons, it was the GOP legislators and the governor who tried to thwart that effort. And so part of what we need to do is to continue to pinpoint those levers of power and those ways in which they try to stifle us. In a way, Corona was great because it gave us expanded early voting and massive mail-in voting. And what we have to do now is make sure that they don't undo that, and we continue to work to put power in those places where it's most effective at helping the people to realize the will and the voice of the people.
I would like to hear from Lula, but I'm just going to say that I don't know if the majority, if it really is just a minority of people in this country that have these feelings and sentiments. Otherwise, how did Trump get elected in the first place? They were protecting their whiteness and their privilege.
I mean, clearly, 75 million voted for him and 80 something for Biden. And, Hillary Clinton won the majority vote. So there's a problem with, there's a problem. I'm not going to say there's not a problem, but what I'm saying is that I don't know that I mean, I'm not quite sure what I'm saying. I mean, there is a problem for sure, but I think it's in reaction to the fact that there is movement happening, that there are people in this country who want to move forward and who are finding ways to make that happen. I think that this is a reaction to Lumumba's point that has always been there, and that it has morphed. It has always been there, but it's not the winning argument. It's maybe the most violent and maybe the one that still has power entrenched in places that need to be removed and excoriated. But I don't think that that's the winning argument. I think that I just think that we're at a different place. And I think that, or we're moving in a direction of a different place. And I think that 2020 has shown both sides of that coin.
Yeah, I want to maybe pivot a little bit just to reiterate something that Eddie Glaude had said in the clip that we saw. I think that we know the conversation right now is focused on 45. There's a lot of attention being placed there in terms of what he created and what he allowed to happen, what he planned to happen, centering himself. And I think part of the challenge that we have to have is really having a much deeper analysis. He's low-hanging fruit. We know what he's about. He's low-hanging fruit. How we got to him is what needs to be discussed. What happened that got us to the point that we actually saw 70 million people choose to elect a white supremacist? Where are we? Where were the conversations before that made some non-negotiable positions saying that, no, we are not going to allow this kind of narrative, this kind of language. We won't allow this kind. The point really is that we've had a lot of not just disappointing, but positions from, and I'm going to just call it out there. I think a lot of our mainstream civil rights organizations are more interested in preserving this performative appearance of democracy than really being committed to trying to create something that is close to it. And I think when we continue to do that, when we continue to allow to put Band-Aids on stuff, continue to cover up and say that this is not America, then this is how we get where we are.
Yeah, because I'm glad you said that, Elle, because and I also believe like a lot of young people are hip to what's going on. Some of us might not see it, but they know. Like anybody under 21 right now is like, we don't have a planet. We're in a pandemic. What's the point of going to school? Why go to college? Like all of it has to be basically, as Ferguson taught many of us, the whole damn system is guilty, and I do believe that this 7 years since Ferguson to now, it is a young generation that's very clear. I think the problem is we've gone to an over-reliance on voting people into office. Let's not pretend that Biden and Harris are going to be that much different in terms of what's going on internationally as well. And we have to have that analysis. What's happening right now is that the whole world is under siege right now, for the most part, except North Korea or, Iran or something, under siege because of a maniac. So we have to get back to some analysis around Pan-Africanism, internationalism. I think young people are very clear. And honestly, I'm at the point where, to me, right, the American project is an utter failure. This is the last gasp of a dying empire. And the biggest thing that's driving all this right now, though, is workers. No matter global pandemic, we need workers out there. We got to keep the capitalist wheel going. And in most of these conversations, which I'm part of, but we're not centering, I think, right now workers, and we're have moved towards elected officials doing stuff for us. We have the most elected African-American, Latino people ever. How did we get here in 2020 then? What's the point of having a democratic city when you have a Black mayor, a Black police chief, a Black attorney general who, no matter what, will always still side with the police? The American project is a failure. It was a failure when it inflicted genocide and land grab from indigenous people, enslaved African people, exploited workers, denied women. And I think that's part of our narrative. I'm sure you all agree, and many people. I don't want to even have a conversation where anybody's like, this is America. How could this be America? Y'all are mad late right now. If that's even the starting point, we have to move way beyond that. Not us. Us moving beyond that.
Well, that's not the conversation that we've had about us questioning whether this is America or not, right? That's why Eddie's comments were so important. What is the narrative? What is the perspective that we're going to share amongst us, amongst family, in the church, in places that people understand where we are, right? Because going to Esie's point, right? You're in the double-sided coin, right? So if we're looking for the coin to flip our way, what is that makes it go that way, right? We know that Georgia was an example. Black Lives Matter has been an example. How do we move forward? What is the moving forward narrative? What is the moving forward action? And right now, you're almost talking to the world, because there's no secret, right? We're in COVID. We're all sheltered, so that organizing is out in the open. I remember that Bernice Johnson Reagan once told me, she says, for African Americans, our organizing was in our voice. Was in our song, because it had to be public. What is our song? What is the narrative in that song that we all should be singing, and we should all be saying?
Mm-hmm. I think some of the challenge is trying to figure out if there's one framing or narrative that's going to position us in a real effective response. And I think that becomes real daunting. We do know some very basic things that we need to go back to. We do know that we have to rely on our communities for not just safety, but our communities for the answers that we are looking for. The motto for the Movement for Black Lives has been for some time, who keeps us safe? We keep us safe, right? The idea that we know that there is a growing white terrorist, not just body of organized formations, but narrative and agenda that is, re-energized. We know that we had survived those times before by relying on ourselves, our communities, our people to keep us safe. We did not rely on as much as some people actually went and petitioned the DOJ for support. And I want to mention that's important, because it helps to highlight the contradiction of the state. But we relied on ourselves. And so what's being called to question today is, where are our community support spaces? What we were able to do through the COVID pandemic in terms of the mutual aid work is extremely informative. Extremely informative. There would have been so many more bodies had we not figured out ways to feed each other, had we not figured out ways to provide PPE for each other, had we not figured out ways to protect each other, those particular ways that we've responded, not just to that, but to other situations in the past, is informative. We need to make sure that we are looking at some of those spaces. So whether or not you belong to an organization, do you know the folks on your block? Do you know the people that you can go to help create these safe spaces? Are you willing to help provide things for people on your block, in your building? Like, we have to start with some very basic and fundamental things that we know to be true.
I agree with you that I said that's what basically saved us here in Puerto Rico after the hurricanes, when the communities were organized on a very single, small community level, street by street, community by community, people helping each other and getting to know what are the specific needs of each particular family, organization, school, district, and then you go from the small to the big ones. But also, I like to add that we might have to held accountable the legal system. We have to fiscalize what they're doing, and be more aggressive in terms of fighting this also on the court level, on the court of public opinion level, and also within the communities. It has to be a multi-sectoral narrative that we have to spread around in order to be able to compete against 70 million Americans who voted for Trump and that are still in that frame of mind, believing that they have a right over the rest of the people.
And I think that, structural changes are demanded at this point. One of the things that concerns me is, despite the fact that the Democrats, I'll say, won the presidency and the Senate and still hold the House, is that at the state legislative level, we lost some ground. And this is the year 2020. It's a census year. The state legislators are going to draw up the electoral maps that will stand for the next 10 years, right? And so there are a number of states, two more than there were before, that have a trifecta, which means they have both chambers of the legislative house and the governorship. And so there's going to, in my opinion, there's going to be a mad dash in these Republican state houses, of which there are the majority in this country, and even more so after the 2020 election, to even further gerrymander on a partisan basis to disenfranchise Black people, Latinos, Native Americans. I mean, when I say partisan, it's partisan and racial, right? And so we see that one of the ways in which they're continuing to be able to hold power is at that level. And what are we going to do about it, considering the fact that they messed with the census, and there's a perceived, they're expecting there to be a significant undercount of our people, which is an automatic disenfranchisement, coupled with what's going to happen at the state houses to further gerrymander these districts and to dilute the political power of the people. So I think that we really have to, work at that level to once again figure out their next step, which is they've got the federal judiciary. What do we do about that? What do we do about are we packing courts, or are we adding the number of federal judges? Are we working in Congress? Because the Supreme Court has already said in a ruling last year or 2019 that it's perfectly okay for the state legislators to gerrymander. They're not going to get involved with this. And so there are efforts at state court at the state court Sandra's point, in Pennsylvania right now, there is a lawsuit, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled against gerrymandering on the basis that it violated the Pennsylvania Constitution. So what are we going to do on these levels? What are we going to do in Congress? Because the Supreme Court said we're not going to get involved with gerrymandering, but Congress itself can make federal rules. So one of the things that came out of this election, and also the aftermath of the election, was the solidification of the idea of keeping federal elections at the state level. Mitch McConnell, when he did his speech at the beginning of the certification of the Electoral College, warned his Republican counterparts that doing what they were doing was going to inevitably result in the reformation and the elimination of the Electoral College. And he warned them that if that happens, that the Republicans would never get voted in again, and that the country would be, in his words, ruled by two or more large Democratic states. So the Republicans are very aware of the fact that they have to keep the federal elections in this 50-state system, each one of which has its own rules, its own labyrinth. But what are we going to do in Congress while we have the two branches of Congress and the presidency to set us up for the next 4 years, and the 4 years after that, and the 4 years after that? And we have to think 10 years in advance, because that's where they're doing right now in these state houses, is drawing up the plans for the next 10 years of the power that they're going to continue to hold.
Well, I think that what we need to do is start sort of meshing some of what we've been saying in terms of going forward, and going to Lumumba, right? And going to Olga, who has been incredibly silent, right? And the points that Rosa has made, Esmeralda has made, right? And Isis has made. What is that imagery? What is that narrative, right? As a marketing person, as a person that knows that the imagery and words change minds, right? What kind of, let's say, for want of a better term, what kind of campaign, what kind of narrative do we take on at multiple levels, right? To filter through in information. Because if you talk to most people about the Electoral College, they don't even know what you're talking about, right? There are certain concepts and certain things that drive the country that most of us don't know. And in most schools, basic civics is not even being taught. So the question becomes is, how do we develop an information system that educates as well as moves people to certain actions?
To your point, Marta, it's really important for us to create that system. And when we talk about markets, I'm a marketer. Marketing, it's something that this country has changed fundamentally, because the country itself has become a market, and everything that the country does is based on
what time?
Economic prowess or power. So one thing that I know for sure, absolutely, is that this pushback that we have seen historically, generation after generation, we have seen that we go into a turning point, and then there's a reason that the system replenishes itself and it goes back to where it was. Right now, we have a fundamental difference in that market-based economy of this country, which is the buying power, right? The buying power of Blacks and Asians and Native Americans is $2.4 trillion. The Latinos is 1.5 trillion. So that push that we didn't have before in a market-based economy, as we have it now at an individual level. So my question is for everyone that's doing the job that reporters are doing, like Sandra and Rosa, how should we leverage, and a community base, right? How should we leverage that power in an economy and a system that is a market, and market forces are upon us as well? I think that is a fundamental change on what we've seen so far. And I think that the answer to your question, Marta, is having a platform that is multi-system, multimedia, and that can connect with, as Rosa was saying, that can communicate the truth, right? There's a truth to the situation. There's a system, there's a systemic problem. And a systemic problem doesn't change unless the system is reshuffled and redone, not to say that is dismantled and redone again. So my point there would be, how do we go about telling the truth? How do we affect real systemic change so that we can see that the racial issues that we have right now and the white supremacy that we have right now are part of that same system? You know, third law of, I'm also a scientist, right? So the third law of physics is, when a force comes, another force with the exact same right strength, it's gonna come, it's gonna clash. That is gonna keep happening. We have now more power, more economic power, more social power, more connectivity than ever before. So how do we keep that? Creating a system that is digitally based, that trickles down to communities, and that is fueled by scholars and teachers and community leaders, also people like you guys are here today. That would be my point. Also my question: how do we, knowing what we know now, that we are in a tipping point, and we have been before in a tipping point historically, how do we leverage that today to make and then move forward for that 10 years, 15 years, 25 years? Because right now we have more power historically than we have ever had before.
See,
I think, can I just say something? Somebody has their mic on and is doing something that's really making it very fuzzy to hear. So when you're not speaking, put your mic on mute, please. Thank you.
I'll be very brief on these 3 points. So first, actually, you know, that idea of buying power is being debunked at this moment. In fact, I have the book, and people need to read it, because we don't have power. Like, you can't have power in a capitalistic system. That's what's missing from this conversation in general, not this, all of them. We have to find our way out of capitalism. That's got to be the goal. Because the only reason these companies, which are private and have a right to have anyone who they want on, whatever, are stepping up like that is what Lumumba said at the beginning, the performative aspect of what's happening. Dr. Jared Ball just wrote last year, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. Because we've been part of that generation that we were taught self-determination, but that self-determination then turned into Black Latino capitalism. If we don't talk about how that runs everything, and I do again think younger people are way ahead of us because they're seeing their own parents not be essential workers, but sacrificial workers, right? Because you're gonna eventually get it or potentially die. The second thing is, we gotta break the two-party system. I mean, I'll try to the day I die to break this two-party system. If we're dependent on the Democratic Party to save us, after everything they've done, they consented to Donald Trump when he won because they wanted to save the American presidency, even if it was for them later. So this whole dependence on the Democrat, I want to hold the Democrats accountable. I don't even want to talk about the 75 million crazy, mostly white women. 56% of white women in this country voted for him again. And I don't think we should be framing our arguments anymore around what these politicians are going to do, man. AOC and them went in there and told the truth. And because of that, they're going to suffer the consequences of telling the truth. To the point where AOC, Ilhan Omar are considering not running potentially again for office. You're talking about they could be the youngest and dopest, but might leave the quickest because the Democratic leadership has sidelined them. It has told them, if you continue to be this way, we're going to primary people against you. That's what's going on. And that's why then essentially within the Democratic Party context, we can get an Afro-Latino like Richie Torres, who hates himself, hates Afro-Latinos, hates gay people, and representing New York from the Bronx. That's the Democratic Party. That's who needs to be held accountable for even us being here right now in terms of electoral politics. That's my belief.
And listening to your point, Rosa, it's important also to think about how we affect that in a more efficient way within the system that we are now, which is the question that I ask myself consistently, right? Because I 100% agree with you in the point of we have a problem and it's capitalism, right? But how within the system that we are now, we start to put up a narrative, and not only a narrative, an action plan that drives that change that we're looking for, that can be consistent for generation. And then in 10, 15, 25 years, we can see a change within the system.
Rosa, you read my mind when you just put in the chat cooperative economics. I did want to raise that, not in a real just abstract form, but we're looking at a rise across the country of cooperative models where people recognize extractive models of commerce and exchange are not working. People are really, really clear about that. And not only are these models being popped up throughout the country, but people are making connections with them and other models internationally. So I do think that we're in a space now where people are used to, or not used to, but are recognizing the mandate of exploring other options, other alternatives. And people aren't afraid to do that. And I think we really need to make sure that we allow space for that. I think also, again, we're raising a number of things that we know work. We're raising a number of things that we know need to be prioritized. But I want to caution again that we don't take on a daunting task of trying to figure out what the silver bullet is, because there is no one silver bullet. Like, we need to pick the things that we know work, do them simultaneously. So we need to make sure that we are part of cooperatives. We need to make sure that we are holding elected officials accountable when we are voting them in. We need to make sure that our framing around voting is one that is utilizing it as a tool towards liberation, not as one that is committed towards some other performative commitment to the U.S. democracy. We want to make sure that we create these smaller, really tight-knit community support groups, organizations, if you call them that, whatever. But we know there's some very basic best practices that we can begin to do to make sure that we shift not just the narrative, but what our fundamental realities look like. And not give ourselves a headache trying to figure out how we can change the world tomorrow. It's not going
thank you so much for that, Lamoma, because the big picture is daunting. Though we know we need to do something serious about cooperative economics. But on actions or what we need to be doing, this conversation is about the narrative, but it's also about the action. Where do we go from here? And I love this panel because we have in this panel so much wealth in terms of tactics and strategies. We got a slew of them here, and I'm saying that to say that we need to be doing all we can in the best way we can to move our people toward liberation. And that means that, yes, some of us have to be working on redistricting. I'm a redistricting attorney. I'll be doing that for the next 3 years. But some of us need to be working on the media, getting the word out. Some of us need to be talking to our neighbors and our children and letting them know that becoming a millionaire should not be their aspiration in life when their community is falling down around them. Or they don't even have a community. Or moving out of the community should not be their idea of a successful life. And all of this goes to us changing the narrative of what we are striving for as a people, not as individuals. What we are striving for as a people in this nation. And until we realize that it's about us and not about I or me, we're going to continue to have problems. So each of us needs to use our talents moving forward. And if you're not involved in some cooperative economics right now, get involved. It's as difficult as you think. And yes, all of these artisans, they're calling them artisans. That's what we used to do. Sometimes we would call it a hustle, but whatever. We use what we have. We use our talents, and we make sure that we market it.
I agree, Esmeralda, and in terms of the narrative, I think that the abolitionist framework gives language and gives a narrative and gives a metaphor for liberation and what we're trying to do. And in terms of what to do, it's everything. To Rosa's point, we know that everything is broken. You know what I mean? Everything is not working, from capitalism to the political system. Everything that we've tried for decades to reform, whether it be education, healthcare, housing, workers' rights, living wage, income inequality, it is all broken. And so basically all hands on deck, right? And into a metaphor of the abolitionists, put down the plow and start running, right? Running away from the systems that we know don't work for the planet, for the people, for any of us, and towards the things that affirm life, towards the things that affirm community, towards the thing that affirms liberation, right? And putting down the plow. I think we had at another panel that we did, Lumumba's wife Monifa talked about the bus drivers during the Black Lives Matter protests in the city that refused to take the protesters to jail, right? That's putting down the plow of the machinery and refusing to use your body in the machine against the people. And so it's a dual action. It's an action of being conscious about what we can no longer participate in, what we will no longer ourselves do, right? And where we can work in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our states, in our nation, because everything is broken, right? So we need everybody to do everything that they know how to do, that they're inspired to do, that they have talents to do, to move us forward in the direction of life, in the direction of freedom, in the direction of equality, in the direction of where we want to see, imagination, where we want to
that's where that somehow, and we're getting to the point of how do you capture that narrative, right? Because it's a matter of that narrative educating people in terms of thinking differently. Educating ourselves to think differently. Right?
We are so powerful, right? We are so powerful individually and collectively that it can happen, that it is happening, and we can continue to make it happen. I think that's the narrative. The narrative is one of empowerment, and that power comes from who you are as a person, understanding who you are spiritually, as your ancestors, who you are, and what you bring to the table is powerful in and of itself, and bring that together with other like-minded people to make stuff happen, because we just need so much to happen. But we can't, in my opinion, indulge in narratives of victimhood or
well, that's not what this panel is about. That's exactly what it's not about.
It's not about that. That's what I'm saying. Like, we can't indulge in it, but we have to tell the truth. And the truth is that all this stuff is happening, and it's been happening. The 500 years here in America has been a disaster for our people. That's facts, right? But the fact of the matter is,
let's move forward, because we've touched that, right?
Yeah,
okay, Sandra?
I was going to say that, and I agree with you, but also consider the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic that have taken a real deadly toll, particularly on our communities. What are we doing that is working? What is not working with our communities? How are we helping each other, helping the families that are being affected? I think at this moment, even I would say it's even more important, and that what is going on with the racists and the bigots, the people that are protesting in favor of Trump, because there have been so many deaths so far, and I wonder how can we do what can we do on a community-based level, on a family unit level, on a street level, to help each other, to help our communities to be able to protect also the elders, because a lot of people are dying and getting sick, and also to protect that collective history, which is important as well. So I think that has to be taken into consideration, because COVID is going to stay here for a long time, at least a couple of months. I hope it can go away as fast as possible, but it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So that has to be taken into account. Today, 3 different Congress people got infected, and there are 3 more. That.
But they told them why they got infected, Sandra. They got infected because they were about to be killed, and the Republicans wouldn't put a mask, and it's 3 women of color over 65. You're like, that's crazy.
I know. And
I think that Puerto Rico, for me, is a model. I grew up in a barrio in New York, and people almost don't know your neighbors, right? When you get into certain places and in certain buildings. And here, neighbors are working with each other. At least I'm finding that. And people are willing to share their fruit, their material with you, so that the model that Lumumba was talking about, right? How do we deal as community? How do we deal as friends? How do we deal as neighbors? Because that develops the narrative that we're looking for, right? How do you amplify that narrative that it's not about you alone, but it's about the person who lives next to you as well, right? And how do we protect each other? And that narrative is not there. It's not there for the broader public, and I'll be transparent. When Isis was talking, right, we have developed community when there shouldn't have been community, right? And there's 3 of us on this, 4 of us on this panel that are Yoruba priests and priestesses, right? So that is a model that we have internalized because we practice it every day. But that's not a broader model for people. And taking away whatever spirituality you believe in, what are the codes, what are the values, what are the ethics that all of us should live by, right? If we're going to live in some kind of human space.
Right.
Right? And that is not a popular or an overt conversation, right? And that's not even within, let's say, official church context, because some of it is very, I would say, very negative, right? Based on sin, right? And we're based on humanity, and we're based on loving nature, and we're based on understanding that nature is sacred, and we're understanding other things. So how does that get translated to the broader public in order to live differently and understand differently? I mean, the beauty here of the young people is that they're taking over land and planting. My neighbor is saying, like, oh, okay, in case anything happens, we're gonna, between us, we have aguacate, we have plátano, we have different things. That's key. because that's an understanding that you don't know if your food is going to be there in another year, right? And that I know is a lot because of the hurricanes and things that have happened. But how does that thinking get broader, right? Because if one of us is hurting, all of us are hurting in a very real sense.
About Marta, about Puerto Rico specifically, in my mind, it's about culture, and we're receiving an attack on our bodies and our minds, and a psychological attack and an attack on our culture. What you're referring to Puerto Rico with that feeling of, your neighbor is there for you, and there's a mango, and there's food, and there's coffee, and that's basics of culture. One of the things that we're being attacked on, aside from being attacked from every single side, it's culture, and how the tenements of our culture as Puerto Rican, as Afro-Boricuas, African American, and Latinos, our culture is there precisely for that, and it's another shield that I feel it's important to keep, right? Intertwined with community. What is community without culture, and what's culture without community? And I think that side of it, that aspect of it, is what has kept me, probably you, and a lot of us sane, right? Reaching out and knowing that we are there for us, as Lumumba was saying, right? And how then do we potentiate that, and we turn that into a language and a narrative and a platform that then can be communicated to everybody?
Exactly. Right? You're right, because there are certain principles that we're living by, and ethics that we're living by, that have allowed us to survive. And in a colony, it has the longest colony in the planet, and it still survives. So culture is power.
The resistance in
culture is power.
It's all over the place. We're being under two imperialistic, right, governments, Spain and the United States. And how many times have them had us to not speak in Spanish? And I know that obviously Spanish is not the native language, but it was the language that culturally we took as ours, right? And that kind of resistance that is tied closely to culture is one of the safeguards that had helped me to process all of this mess that we're talking about. So turning that into a platform, and turning that platform into an accessible platform that can trickle down to everyone in the community, is what I do with digital, right? How are we here connecting and sending this message to everybody? So how do we turn that into a platform that can be then communicate to everyone and potentiate and communicate our culture and our values and what we believe on? And how do we as markets also push back on the system by not promoting or not following or not being part of that market that's following this and this and this such person, individual that it's making our life miserable. So there's as Isis was saying, there's doing a lot and it's doing everything, because it takes everything from now on. So we can then, on this tipping point, that can tip in our favor in the future. Because historically, again, we've had so many wins, but then in the end, we're back. It feels like we're back to square one. Even if
we're not back to square one. Let's not take on conversations. And I heard it before with people saying, certain things. All of us are better off than our parents were. And their parents before them, right? We should not have had to fight anything, because we should never have been enslaved, but we were, right? So that we have better lives, better health, better whatever. It's not where we need to be, but it's better than our great-grandparents. So that one of the things that we have to say is we're in a better place, and what do we do with that better place? And given the information that we have, in terms of demographics, what do we do with that? What do we do with, as Lumumba said, with what we know works? How do we make it work, a conversation for everybody, right? How we restructured family, how we see family, how we did that, right? There wasn't a book. There were certain people who decided that we should recreate family, and we have done it. So how do we tell everybody, you're not alone, you have family? And how do we present ourselves, and how are we present with that? Right? Mm-hmm. So that I think that was the purpose of my anxiety in sort of putting this together, because we have to position ourselves differently, mm-hmm. and language differently, who we are differently. You know, Lubumba's 2 daughters will be different than what happened to us. My grandchild of 3 years old going into the future will have a different life. But how do we frame it for her going forward? You know, so that we can't take that, woe is me, we're in a terrible place. Yeah, we're in a terrible place, but we're in a better place, mm-hmm. right? Than those that came before us are. So how do we take advantage of that, given the numerical majority that we are, right? Not only within this nation, but within the world. And how do we use what we didn't have before? Because now we have a level of technology that works against us, but also how do we make it work for us? So we're coming to a close, and I want to thank you all for responding so quickly to the call. And I'd like to end by you all saying 1 word or 2 words to end the conversation that will give us the next steps. So, Rosa, let's go with you.
Resist harder.
Cool. Sandra? Leave me.
I would say that we have to preserve the culture and enhance the culture, the families, and the communities.
Thank you. Isis?
Liberation.
Esmeralda?
We who believe in freedom shall not rest until it comes.
Lubumba?
Since nobody else kept it to 2 words, I'm gonna. Except Rosa. Rosa finally followed instructions. I would say, live community and protect community. We keep us safe.
Olga?
Connect the culture.
So I'd like to say thank you again to you all for heeding the call. You know I have family, and I know I have a circle of people who love me. So thank you for responding to the call so quickly. Olga for putting it all together so quickly. And to those who are listening, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to hearing from you. And we expect to have more conversations, so please stay engaged with us. Thank you so much all. Have a good day.
Thank you all. Be safe.
Asheo.
Love you, Marta.
Love you.
Beso. Rosa.
Beso, Sandra.